6 shots, 6 lives, 1 house. On November 13th, 1974, a man named Ronald DeFeo Jr. walked into a bar in Amityville, Long Island, screaming that his parents had been shot. When the police arrived at 112 Ocean Avenue, they found a scene that would haunt them forever. The entire DeFeo family, father, mother, 2 brothers, and 2 sisters, were found dead in their beds, face down, shot with a .35 caliber rifle. But here is the mystery that science cannot explain. The rifle had no silencer. It would have sounded like a cannon going off in that quiet neighborhood. Yet, the neighbors heard nothing. The victims didn't and Appos wake up. There was no struggle. They just slept through their own execution. It was as if the house itself had sedated them, as if the house wanted them to die. 1 year later, a new family moved in, George and Kathy Lutz. They had 3 children and a dream of a perfect life. They knew about the murders, but they didn't, and Appos care. They got a mansion for a cheap price. They thought they were lucky. They were wrong. They moved in on December 18th, 1975. They fled in terror on January 14th, 1976. They lasted exactly 28 days. This is not the movie. This is not the Hollywood version. This is the true story of what happened in those 28 days. The story of a family that was slowly, methodically torn apart by a force that had been waiting in the dark. Welcome to the real Amityville Horror. Let an Appos look at the family. George Lutz, a former Marine, a strong man, a protector. Kathy Lutz, a loving mother of 3 children from a previous marriage. They were a normal, happy American family. When they saw the house at 112 Ocean Avenue, they fell in love. It was huge. It had a boathouse. It had a swimming pool. It was the kind of place where kids could grow up happy. The real estate agent was honest. She told them, "This is the DeFeo house. People died here." George Lutz famously said, "Houses, Don and Appos, kill people. People kill people." He was a practical man. He didn't, and Appos believe in ghosts. He believed in mortgages and renovations. They bought the house for $80,000, a steal. But on the very first day, the atmosphere began to shift. While they were unpacking, a Catholic priest came to bless the house. George was busy, so the priest went upstairs alone. He entered the room that had belonged to the murdered boys. He sprinkled holy water. He began to pray. Suddenly, a deep, masculine voice coming from nowhere shouted right into his ear. It didn't, and Appos say, "Get out." It said, "You get out." The priest felt a slap on his face. He felt ill. He left the house, shaking. He told George, "Do not use that room. as a bedroom. Do not let anyone sleep in there. George listened, but he didn't, and Appos. Understand. He thought the priest was just sensitive. That was the first warning. The first week was subtle. It wasn't an Appos. Monsters jumping out of closets. It was a slow, creeping sickness. It started with a cold. No matter how high they turned up the heating, the house remained freezing. The family would walk around wearing winter coats inside. But it wasn't an Appos. Just cold air. It was cold spots. You would walk down the hallway and hit a wall of ice. It felt like walking through a person made of frozen air. Then came the flies. It was the middle of winter. December, there shouldn't an Appos be any insects. But in the sewing room, the room the priest had warned them about, hundreds of large black flies appeared. They covered the window. They swarmed the ceiling. George would kill them with bug spray. He would sweep them up, and 20 minutes later, they would be back, buzzing, waiting. Then the smells began. Kathy would be in the kitchen, and suddenly the scent of old, cheap perfume would fill the air. Then it would change to the smell of human waste or rotting meat. The house was messing with their senses. It was testing them. This is the part that terrified Kathy the most. It wasn't an Appos. The ghosts. It was her husband. George was a hard-working man. He loved his business. He loved his stepkids. But within days of moving into 112 Ocean Avenue, George changed. He stopped going to work. He stopped showering. He stopped shaving. He began to spend all his time in the living room, sitting in front of the fireplace. He would keep the fire roaring hot, even though the rest of the house was freezing. He would just sit there, staring into the flames, mumbling to himself. Kathy said he looked different. His eyes looked older. He looked like he was aging 10 years in 10 days. And he started waking up at a specific time. Every single night, George would wake up with a start at 3:15 a.m. He didn't, and know why. He would just wake up, sweat pouring down his face, feeling an urge to check the boathouse. Years later, the police reports confirmed a chilling fact. 3:15 a.m. was the exact estimated time the DeFeo family had been murdered. The house was waking George up to replay the memory of the killings. It was trying to get inside his head. It was trying to turn him into the next killer. While George was losing his mind downstairs, something was happening upstairs with the children. The youngest daughter, Missy, was only 5 years old. She started talking about her new friend. "Who is your friend?" Kathy asked. "Her name is Jodie," Missy said. "She's an angel, but she looks like a pig." Kathy thought it was an imaginary friend. Kids do that. But then, strange things started happening. One night, George and Kathy were in the living room. They looked out the window toward the yard. Two glowing red eyes were staring back at them from the darkness. They weren't human eyes. They were animal eyes. But they were too high off the ground to be a dog. George ran outside with a flashlight. He found nothing. But in the snow, he found footprints. They looked like cloven hooves, like a giant pig walking on two legs. The tracks led right back to the house and stopped at the wall. Missy would say, Jodie said, "You're not going to stay here forever." Jodie said, "You're going to live here with us." The entity wasn't just haunting them. It was grooming the child. By the third week, the house stopped being subtle. It declared war. Kathy Lutz was the heart of the family. The entity knew that if it broke her, the family would collapse. One afternoon, Kathy was in the kitchen. She felt a sensation like someone was embracing her from behind. But it wasn't a hug. It was a grip. She couldn't breathe. She spun around. No one was there. Later that night, she was preparing for bed. She looked in the mirror, and she screamed. Her reflection had changed. Her face was covered in wrinkles. Her hair looked white and thin. For a few seconds, she looked like a 90-year-old hag. She blinked, and it was gone. But the fear remained. And then came the levitation. This is the claim that skeptics hate, but both George and Kathy swore it was true until their dying days. One night, George woke up at 3:15 a.m. He looked at his wife. Kathy was not in the bed. She was floating a foot above the mattress. She was slowly drifting toward the open window. George grabbed her leg and pulled her down. She woke up screaming. She had been having a nightmare that something was trying to drag her out of the house. And the house itself began to bleed. Thick, green, gelatinous slime began to ooze from the walls in the hallway. It wasn't water. It smelled like rot. George would wipe it off, and an hour later, it would be dripping again. The house was sick, and it was infecting them. The terror wasn't just at night. One day, George was in the living room. He heard a noise coming from the empty dining room. It sounded like a marching band. Drums, trumpets, a parade inside his house. He walked into the room. Silence. He walked out. The noise started again. He moved the furniture. He tore up the carpet. He found nothing. The house was mocking him. It was telling him, "I can make you hear whatever I want. You are losing your mind." George was a tough Marine, but he was breaking. He slept with his clothes on. He kept a rosary in his hand, but the rosary beads turned black in his grip. January 14th, 1976, the 28th night. We still don't know exactly what happened on the final night. George and Kathy refused to talk about the specific details. They said it was too personal and too terrifying. But we know this. The temperature in the house dropped to 0. The walls began to bang. Not knocks, but bangs like sledgehammers hitting the siding. The children were waking up screaming, saying that monsters were coming through the floor. George Lutz later said, "We didn't just decide to leave. We were pushed out. They didn't pack. They didn't take their clothes. They didn't take the food in the fridge. They grabbed the kids, ran to the van, and drove away. They left their entire lives behind. Their furniture, their photos, their toys. They never spent another night in that house. They sent movers to get their stuff weeks later. They were refugees from their own American dream." A few weeks later, the world-famous investigators, Ed and Lorraine Warren, arrived at the house. They came with a news crew. They wanted to see if it was a hoax. Lorraine Warren, a clairvoyant, was overwhelmed the moment she stepped inside. She said she felt a diabolical presence. She saw visions of the DeFeo bodies covered in white sheets. Ed Warren was physically pushed to the floor in the basement while praying, and they captured a photo. During the investigation, a camera was set up on the second-floor landing. It was taking automatic photos of the empty hallway. When they developed the film, they found something. In one photo, a small boy is peeking out from a bedroom. His eyes are glowing white. The Lutz children were not in the house. Many believe this is the ghost of John Matthew DeFeo, the youngest victim of the massacre. Or it was the demon, Jodie, in disguise. The Warrens declared the house inhuman. Now, I have to address the controversy. For 40 years, people have said Amityville was a hoax. They say George Lutz made it up to sell books. They say the lawyer planned it over wine bottles. And it is true, there were inconsistencies. The green slime, maybe exaggeration. The pig eyes, maybe a cat. But here is the thing that makes me pause. Both George and Kathy Lutz took lie detector tests. They passed. They divorced later in life. They had no reason to keep up the lie for each other. Yet, until the day they died, they both stuck to their story. And think about this. They left a house they had just bought. They lost money. They were ridiculed by the press. Their children were bullied at school. If it was a scam for money, it was a terrible one. They suffered for it. And the subsequent owners, the people who bought the house after the Lutzes, said they experienced nothing. No ghosts, no slime, no flies. Does that mean the Lutzes lied? Or does it mean that the entity targets specific people? Maybe the house didn't hate the new owners. Maybe it just hated George. The house at 112 Ocean Avenue still stands today. The address has been changed to stop tourists from finding it. The famous eye-shaped windows have been replaced. It looks like a normal suburban home, but the legend remains. The Amityville Horror forces us to ask a terrifying question. When you buy a house, you buy the wood, the brick, and the land. But do you also buy the history? Do you buy the anger, Do you by the sorrow? George and Kathy Lutz thought they bought a bargain. They paid with their sanity. So, the next time you see a for sale sign on a beautiful house that seems a little too cheap, ask yourself, why did the last family leave in such a hurry? Thank you for watching this deep dive into the real Amityville Horror. I want to know your opinion. Do you think the Lutzes were telling the truth, or was it the greatest hoax in history? Let me know in the comments below. And remember, if you wake up at 3:15 a.m. tonight, don't look out the window. Stay safe, and I will see you in the next nightmare.